All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, thanks for attending today's Global Supply Chain 2022 and Beyond, Freight Disruption and Demand Planning. It's a topic that I think is in most people's front of mind at this point. And want to start off by acknowledging the sponsor of this series of webinars, the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions, which is a department within the Economic Development Commission, and their mission is to assist manufacturers to maximize enterprise value by assisting them with innovation, operational excellence, sustainability, and leadership development. We are, of course, part of the District Export Council, specifically the Arkansas District Export Council, even though this webinar is being put on throughout the world. And we have attendees from all over the United States and all over the world. The District Export Council is one of the 60 district export councils throughout the United States. And we're charged with encouraging and supporting the export of goods and services that will strengthen individual companies, stimulate U.S. economic growth, and create jobs. Today's speaker, the person who's going to be directing the conversation is Mr. Tom Cook, and he is the Managing Director of Blue Tiger International, which is an international business consulting services company providing consulting services on supply chain management, trade compliance, purchasing, global trade, and logistics. And he'll be introducing his two colleagues that will be part of the panel today. Just a little housekeeping. Want to let you know that you will be able to enter questions in the question box, and we will be handling the questions at the end of the webinar series. And we will also be providing the email addresses and contact information for those who are participating. So should you want to contact them directly to ask them some specific question that perhaps was not addressed at the time, you can do so. So, Jonathan, why don't you go ahead and jump in before I introduce Mr. Cook?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rudy. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. As Rudy said, thanks for joining us. My name is Jonathan Bricker, and I'm the chairman of the Arkansas District Export Council. In my primary role, I work for Arvest Bank, located in Bentonville, Arkansas. I started off here as the International Business Development Rep, and now I'm a commercial lender with a focus on international C&I businesses that are relocating to Arkansas. For those joining for the first time and unfamiliar with who we are and what we do, we are a private nonprofit organization consisting of experienced exporters and business people who provide support to existing companies or help mentor new to exporting companies. Each of the members have been appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce because of his or her recognized real-world expertise in international trade matters. We also serve as a link between these companies and the U.S. Commercial Service, as well as the Arkansas World Trade Center. I want to mirror Rudy's comments and start off by thanking the Arkansas Economic Development Commission and Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions for their sponsorship and partnership in making today's webinar possible. So thank you. Please reach out to myself or Ms. Heidi or Rudy if we can make an introduction to you to either one of those resources. The deck has some great classes scheduled for the remaining of this year and for next year. The topics range anywhere from country-specific trainings to reshoring and my personal favorite, finance. So if you're new to exporting or thinking about exporting, I encourage you to check out the Grow Your Exports webinar that'll be taking place in February. It is a wealth of knowledge. Rudy is the one that puts that on, and he is well versed in everything exporting. So I invite you to go to our website, exportarkansas.org, and sign up for our newsletter so that you can see our calendar of events. Did I mention that all of those are free to join, just for future reference? So anyway, thank you all for being here today. I look forward to a great presentation. And Rudy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Appreciate that. If we could go back to Tom's slide, would appreciate that. I want to say just a couple of additional things about Tom. He's a member of the New York District Export Council, and he sits on the board of numerous corporations and associations. Tom has been doing this for 30 years, so he's got a great wealth of knowledge, and he has also authored over 19 books on global trade. So once again, the people that we have on today's panel are going to be people who have lots of experience. I think they're going to provide fantastic information. So Tom, if you will introduce your other two colleagues, and Ms. Heidi, if you could go ahead and switch to them, would appreciate that.
Great. We have Jason Manganaro, who I go back with for a fairly long time, who represents the freight forwarding and custom house brokerage side or service provider side of the business. As I represent the consultation side, Jason represents that side. He brings over 20 years of experience in helping companies solve their problems. He's been a very critical partner of ours in working over the last 2.5 years in helping companies mitigate the problems created by the disruption related to the COVID pandemic. And he's going to share some of the experiences and also some of his viewpoints on how best to deal with the circumstances. Then representing the actual importer-exporter side of the mix is Joe Mantello, who is a licensed custom house broker and a 30-year seasoned logistics executive. He actually started out in the freight forwarding and brokerage side of the business and has worked for a number of large companies in helping them manage their supply chain and more specifically the logistics that are involved in both importing and exporting their products around the world. So if you have a really good panel, you got a consultant, you've got a principal importer-exporter, and you have a service provider. So with that, Heidi, if you could put on my slide deck, that would be a good starting point. So all of us have been involved now for the last 2.5 years plus in this COVID issue of the pandemic, which has dramatically changed how we navigate our responsibilities in global supply chain. What I want to do is just show just a few slides here that I'm going to go through fairly quickly that kind of frames the issues that's going to lead to the panel discussion between the three of us for the rest of the time frame. But looking at the biggest issues that all of us face in the supply chain, it has to do with the delays that are involved in moving the goods from point A to point B, whether we be bringing something into the United States or we're exporting something from the United States. And we all know the escalation of costs, which have sometimes grown as much as 10 times as what we were paying in January of 2019. But tied into the delay in the cost is the uncertainty that we have continued to face on exactly how we should go about our demand planning responsibilities and how we need to navigate logistics, booking of shipments, our follow-up mechanisms, and all the responsibilities that we have in successfully moving goods from point A to point B. So as we go through the panel discussion and some of the slides here, we'll look at the best ways to deal with some of these issues. COVID started the chain of events that pushed us into the chaotic state of supply chain that has impacted both import and export activity. Today, as we approach 27 months of this disruption, and it almost seems like a dream that all that time has passed since that point in time, we've learned that there's no one single cause to the problem, nor one single answer to the management of the problem overall. It's a culmination of issues, and it's also a culmination of steps that we have to take. And while there are signs that disruption is subsiding, I think most people in supply chain would agree that it's gotten a little bit easier in the past 4 to 6 months. There are still serious lingering issues, and it is possible that we are just getting better at managing these problems because we've been dealing with it for so long. One of the key factors that's involved in supply chain management is that just-in-time inventory management doesn't exist anymore. And this has an impact on our import side as much as it does on our export side, because our exports are imports for our clients overseas. It also has impacted our customer service and how we navigate that, and our business development, more specifically in our export sales activities. It's impacted all modes of transportation. It's impacted all countries around the world, and it's impacted almost every business model that exists in the world today. Doesn't make a difference what we're manufacturing, what we're distributing, or what we're shipping. Somewhere it's been impacted by the events of the COVID pandemic. In our own organizations, it's impacted every silo from senior management to procurement to export, sales, customer service, operations, manufacturing, and obviously the residual impact that falls into the financial and legal side of our business models. It has impacted demand planning, and that's where the uncertainty factor has come into play. If you're uncertain as to when a manufacturer can make something available, if you're in customer service or sales, how quickly can manufacturing get raw materials and the components in to finish manufacturing? It's pretty difficult to plan. It's impacted procurement. It's impacted the ability for a company to continue resiliency and sustainability. It's created difficulty and challenges in sales and business development, more particularly in our export sales activities. It's impacted our margins, our profitability, and our ability to successfully grow at an even, steady pace. And we also recognize the fact that one of the impacts of the pandemic has been that a significant number of people have been working remotely, and there are some benefits to that, but for the most part, it's really been a much more difficult situation, particularly for those involved in supply chain, where you actually have the physical movement of goods, warehousing, storage, manufacturing, that really requires people to be on site. Some of the additional factors that relate to the disruption relates directly to the issue of demand and capacity. And until the demand dissipates dramatically, there'll always be a problem with the capacity to provide that supply. I ask the question always, how many of us have more paper towels or toilet paper in our home than we actually need? How many of us have more canned goods in our cabinets than we actually need? Because that's where the start of the demand is so great, which starts the chain of the events that cause the disruption in the supply chain from a capacity standpoint. The ability to get raw materials delivered to manufacturers, the impact of all the carriers, being ocean freight, air freight, trucking, and now extended to warehousing, which has really impacted the entire transportation infrastructure globally. We also recognize the factor of COVID politics and the fact that it's been politicized not only here in the United States, but in other countries around the world as well. Some of that politicizing has continued to cause some of the delays that have occurred. As an example of this is most people who know in dealing with China that they have a zero tolerance policy. So as soon as an area has a certain count of COVID cases, they lock it down. They close down the entire ability for people to move, for people to manufacture, for people to ship, for people to receive, for people to move within those areas. So it causes a tremendous disruption, both from a procurement standpoint and from an export sales standpoint. It's caused cost increases, not only the ones that we relate in the transportation infrastructure, but also to all of us who go out and buy food and go to the supermarket, a car, go to the box stores, whatever it is. We've all seen a tremendous increase in pricing, which has led to this inflation. So where is the resolution coming from? What should we be looking for? First of all, it's not going to come directly from Washington to any great extent. Where it really comes from is from companies and the professionals like many of you who are on this call, servicing global supply chains and navigating the challenges and finding solutions to the various problems that we face. But as time goes on, as the demand diminishes and all the things that we look at in terms of manufacturing, purchasing, procurement, has evidence that there's a significant decrease now in demand, particularly here in the United States and in Western countries in Europe. That will allow the capacity to handle that volume, and the impact of COVID will become more stabilized. And importantly, the continued persistence, hard work, and creative solutions coming from the supply chain managers, many of you on this call today. We have found that the key in the mindset and the thought process relative to this is not to think about eliminating the problem, because the problem is just so great, so vast, so complicated. The key is to take steps to mitigate it, or mitigate the impact. Developing resources, okay? Getting creative, exercising patience and planning are some of those things. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you was one of our clients resolved their problem because they were having trouble booking containers on inbound raw materials to a manufacturing location here in the United States. And they bypassed the whole container business model and moved it by chartering an actual vessel and moving their freight bulk. And then they reversed that on their export sales of that product overseas. The same thing, they had trouble getting containers on a readily available basis that they had prior to COVID. Okay, they had customers complaining overseas that they weren't delivering on time. So they went ahead and actually chartered a vessel on the export side of the equation as well, and were able to fulfill their orders. And in actuality, the unit cost in a chartering circumstance, both on the import side and the export side, was significantly lower, as much as 20% lower than moving it in a containerized manner. So other things for us to look at is the concept of demand planning on the import side, the basis of historical data, demand, the analytics, the experience, qualitative data, and the impact of COVID. And when we look at pricing as an example, in January of 2020, we were paying as much as $2,500 for a 40-foot container coming in from Asia into the United States. In November of 2021, that went to as high as $23,000. Some smaller companies were paying as much as $30,000. And here we are now in August of 2022, and the price has come down to $7,000. And I just heard a week ago that a client has received a price that actually has dropped under $5,000. So that's a good thing. The delays are still there, not as quite as long, but we're seeing the pricing starting to drop pretty dramatically. On the air freight side, as an export transaction, in January of 2019, if we were moving 500 kilos from JFK to Brussels, the price would have come in around $1.20 a kilo, taking 2 days to get there. In January of 2021, a year later, that same shipment could have cost as much as $10.50, again, almost 10 times as expensive, but taking another additional 10 days to get there. In January 2022, we started to see that pricing slide down. It got down to as little as $8. And again, a little bit less time, 8 days. And in July 2022, when we last looked at this, it had already come down to just above $4 a kilo and taken about 6 days. So in both cases, the pricing, both on the import and export side, are starting to slide down. So I asked the question is, if we remember as shippers, people who import things and export things, we used to call our freight forwarder, our custom house broker, and say, here's what I need picked up, here's what I need shipped, take care of it. And they took care of everything, and then the goods showed up wherever they were going to go. Well, one of the evidences of this COVID problem is that as supply chain executives, we had to get involved with the granular detail pretty dramatically. And we had to start paying attention to the detail. Are chassis available? What's the time frames that we could pick up and deliver? What happens if freight gets bumped? What's our next option? Okay. How long should we allow for something to go from A to B that regularly took 5 or 6 days? How much time do we have to allow? All these things had to be considered, connecting all the dots. And it really became a significant higher level of diligence that we had to apply to our process. On the import side, specifically, we had to manage suppliers much more vigorously. We had to increase safety stock levels. We had to order 4 to 6 months in advance, and we had to increase the number of suppliers pretty dramatically. On the export side, for planning purposes, we had to manage our customer needs more vigorously. How much do they actually need in order for us to fill that order? plan on shipping another 30 to 60 days in advance of what normally would be considered the acceptable time frame. Create overseas consolidation and distribution points. Joe Mantello from Cosina Corporation will talk a little bit about that because he's done that for his company. And seek freight options and negotiate with a leveraged circumstance. And we'll look at a case study, the panel discussion. Paying attention to landed costs, both on the import and the export side, became a much more critical, important factor for all of us involved in international shipping. So these are things that I wanted to focus on, and what I really want to do because of the timing here is I'd like to switch over to the panel and reach into Jason and to Joe, okay? And I had sent them some questions that I wanted to ask them. And when I ask Jason your question and you respond, Joe, if you have something to add to it, please feel free and jump in to do that. And the same thing, vice versa, okay? So I'm going to start off with you, Jason. And the question is, what changes have you seen in the past 4 months as respects to the disruption in the global supply chain we witnessed over the last 2+ years?
Thanks, Tom, and thank you for that great kind of lead in about what the current situation is. Yeah, I would say I'm not sure if it's exactly 4 months, but I feel like the early phases of the COVID navigation of supply chain issue was really focused a lot on supply side, origin side, if you will, problems. COVID shutdowns that were delaying manufacturing, lack of empty equipment on the ocean side specifically to get freight moving. Unreliability of sailing schedules, of flight schedules, a large part of the air freight capacity being taken out of circulation with the reduction of commercial passenger flights. And what seems to have happened in the last several months, I would say, is it's become much more of a receiving issue from our perspective. You've got still congestion at ports. Speaking of the inbound U.S. side, we had really severe congestion on the West Coast originally. A lot of freight movement started to migrate towards the East Coast. That's become very congested. There's a shortage of chassis. There's congestion getting things on rail to move inland. You mentioned it earlier, warehouses are full. Warehouse space and overflow capacity is very limited right now. And, we have already kind of a reduced pool of truckers available, I think, globally, really, to move freight in terms of first mile, last mile. And with the kind of surge in import levels and export levels, that same population is still serving the same needs. So we don't have the extra capacity on that side either. So that's kind of my biggest observation for how it's changed. Now there's, for example, a year ago, it was difficult to find shipping containers to load and ship. Now there's a huge number of shipping containers available. There's a lot of new containers that have flooded into the market. But you have a lot of loaded containers sitting on chassis at facilities, unable to get into warehouses because they're already kind of chock-a-block full of goods. Demand in some sectors has kind of slowed. Inventory levels are larger than they've ever been. You mentioned just in time has kind of gone away. So people are holding more safety stock and goods aren't moving through their facilities as quickly as they were. So you've just got kind of a bottleneck type situation happening.
Let me ask you a question, Jason, relative to that, because one of the things, phenomenons that we saw last year was a lot of exporters faced the fact that they weren't able to get container availability on their outbound. And some of the ships were bringing empty containers back to Europe or back to Asia, empty, rather than providing the space available for the purpose of quicker turnaround. So is that now something that's dissipated and it's gotten in a better situation, or is it still the same thing?
Still happening, actually. I think there is still kind of a movement to load vessels with empty going back more urgently than loading with full export containers, especially, from the US. I think it's improved, but I think it's still there. It's still a challenge, getting empty equipment where you need it, arranging equipment to get to ports to be able to load on vessels and then catching the vessel that you originally planned. Those are all still challenging.
Right, good. So Joe, did you want to add anything, or I'll throw the question for you?
Well, I think we all know Congress passed the Shipping Reform Act about 2 months ago now, and one of the things is that the FMC was now going to have a little bit more forceful oversight, if anything, self-guided forceful oversight on certain things that were affecting the bottlenecks at the ports, and one of them was the availability of containers, especially to the agricultural industry. So do you see that at all? Do you see it, or is it just too early to see any effects of that yet, Jason, with the availability of the containers?
Yeah, I would say, again, I think there's been a little improvement on that front, Joe, but I'm a little bit worried about the new Shipping Act, because, even with the stronger language, the FMC in general kind of lacks the enforcement capability, on some of these things, and especially when you're talking about, rail carriers, international carriers. If you talk about the ocean side of things, there's really no major U.S. flagged carriers anymore, right? That ship globally. There's a lot of regional ones. So it's the enforcement that kind of concerns me on that. I do think that there is that desire to not miss opportunity to make equipment available, but I think, again, it's this issue of where it used to be a front side, now I feel like it's a backside one, where it's a lot of the equipment is maybe even where it needs to be, but it's not unloaded, it's not available. There's trouble moving it around locally. We're seeing that a lot, especially the chassis shortage is getting really severe in some places, and just that ability to mount a container and move it.
Interesting.
It's still very challenging.
The question that you bring up about the FMC, Joe, is a good question, because it was specifically designed to help that circumstances that a lot of agricultural companies and big exporters face in their availability of getting containers. But to resonate on what Jason said, the FMC lacks the bandwidth and the manpower and the enforcement arm to really hold companies accountable to make that happen. So there has been some marginal effort of success, but nothing that I would call really measurable that would really say it's been impactful in a positive way.
Right. I think it's generally accepted that it was it's a step in the right direction by providing the FMC a little bit more authority to investigate these things and ask for the backup for the reasons for the additional detention and demurrage charges and the lack of equipment being made available to the U.S. exporter. Who knows what the future holds, if this is just maybe the initial foray of the act, and if it's going to one day prove useful, but it's off to a crawl.
Understood. So Joe, I'm sure that one of your responsibilities in your company is in the planning side of things, of addressing what you're anticipating freight costs are going to be on both your inbound and outbound freight. So how do you see things happening in the last few months, and what are you predicting now that's for the balance of the year and as you go into 2023?
Well, I'm optimistically cautious about what the rate trends that you had demonstrated before. That is real time. To do a quick analysis before the talk, I did see that my personal rates. Now, I'm an LCL ocean importer primarily. Now we've got 50 people or so here, and some might be students, some might be full container load exporters, importers. So everything is going to be different. But of course, there's still going to be some common trends. But I myself am primarily an LCL importer and parcel importer. But, of course, world trade is world trade, whether we're speaking about exports or imports, it's for the most part. I'm still up about 140% of the pre-COVID rates right now for ocean transportation. And that's pre-COVID. So I'm going back to whatever that is, January of 20. Over the last 6 months, though, now I'm only up about 40% of I'm 40% lower than where I was 6 months ago. It's a step in the right direction, but again, I'm still 140% higher than I was before. So it's moving. It's moving in the right trend, but we still got a way to go.
Right.
That's what I'm finding.
So, Joe, I know that one of the things that your company did recently and is now kind of focused on it, even reinforcing it more so, is to, on your export side of your business, is to actually establish a distribution hub in Europe where you would ship larger volumes of shipment, and then they would do the distribution from that point, from both a customer service and a savings standpoint from logistics perspective. So can you expand upon that?
Yeah, actually, the timing for all of that was fortunate for us. We're actually on the good side of that one. Our company put a lot of emphasis on European sales. Beginning about 3 years ago, 2 to 3 years ago, we opened up initially just a sales office with 1 or 2 people, and it's now since grown to a full-blown customer service and sales service center. And of course, the natural progression with that is probably about a year or so ago, we said, well, now's the time. Why don't we start holding some inventory over there, or at least doing more drop shipments from European customers, from European suppliers, through our designated 3PL to our European suppliers, European customers. So it was a natural fit for us. So what did we need to do that? Well, obviously again, every company is different. We maintain 7,000 SKUs in my company with 2 major different divisions, 7,000 SKUs total. Well, we're not going to duplicate our major New York distribution center overnight in a European hub. It would be quite an undertaking. So we focused on the key customers, the different SKUs that the key customers were buying, and we whittled it down to a nice, easy introduction of about 40 different SKUs that we targeted. We approached the customers first before we did anything, and we said, okay, this would be the advantage of it, of distributing these select products from a European distribution center. The obvious costs are going to be transportation. Moving them from Milan to anywhere now in Europe is going to represent a much less cost, and also a big part would be import duty. Goods that were made in Europe that are going to stay in Europe will now just be able to be shipped domestically within the European Union. I don't want to call that domestically. So that's what we're doing. We're still in my opinion, we're still in the walking phase. We would like to expand that as the market allows. Our estimated growth for export sales here in the United States right now is about 18%. We're targeting 18% growth for this year, and that's going to lend towards more European sales and possibly expansion of the distribution center.
Great, thank you. So, Jason, as a service provider, and I know you've been doing this for 20 plus years, and I know that the last 3 years have probably been the most challenging of that time frame for everybody involved. And I know that you handle numerous clients, and you handle both the import and the export side. So what kind of solutions have you been able to bring to the table to your customers that you'd be able to share for us?
Yeah, I would say the biggest shift for our company, and I think others in our sector, has been kind of a mindset shift in terms of where we sit in the industry and what kind of value we can provide. So prior to COVID, we were, I would say, almost 100% a non-asset owning player within the market. We had a lot of relationships with carriers, with truckers, with warehouses, and so forth. And we would kind of leverage our, pooling of volume among multiple customers to get better deals in place on behalf of our clients. But what's shifted is with the kind of unreliability of the services, the unreliability of equipment, we've started to invest more in assets within our industry. So the first kind of major one that we did early on in the pandemic was to invest in shipping containers. In the beginning, it was, a few hundred for specific customers that were looking to kind of overcome the the shortage of empty containers in some of their key manufacturing hubs. And then as it went along, it became something where we started to kind of add to that fleet of containers and to start to manage them ourselves as a, kind of a value asset that we could provide to customers. It used to be where, especially on the ocean side, if you got the space on a vessel, getting the equipment was kind of a guarantee. Well, they wouldn't have given me the space unless they had the empty container for me. Then it became suddenly this kind of second hoop that you had to jump through. Well, I have space booked, but am I going to get an empty to load? And am I going to have enough time to load my goods and return it to the port within the window to make the vessel I'm trying to get on board? So once that extra complication came into play, that this need for more reliable availability of equipment and the ability to kind of manage it a little more closely came into play. So that was one thing we got into pretty quickly, and that's kind of manifested into further down the supply chain line. We've got warehouses now. We're in the process of bringing a cross-dock facility online in Houston to help with transloading containers into trailers. We've purchased trucks. We have a trucking division that spun off from our main company. We have invested in chassis, and we're kind of placing those strategically in places where that availability of chassis is kind of the last holdup to getting loaded containers off of the dock and delivering them and breaking up the bottlenecks that are occurring there. And then, of course, we've always been heavy on the technology side, so we've really ramped up our technology investments as well. And that kind of deep visibility, I think, has proven very valuable in terms of having options and being able to be adaptable to new conditions within the supply chain throughout this last 2+ years.
Sure. So Jason, as you know, we have a lot of people who are on the call here are people who have supply chain responsibilities.
Sure.
And they have to make decisions on who they're going to use to help them move their freight from a logistics perspective. And there are times when they are solicited directly by carriers to
Sure.
talk to them directly as compared to consolidators and freight forwarders and brokers. So how do you feel about that in terms of them making that selection and how they go about navigating that as being in a more responsible way?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been kind of I would say that option has always been there. Work directly with the carrier or work with an intermediary. And I think in past times, there were, sometimes cost advantages to working directly with carriers, sometimes a little bit more security of you'd be a little bit higher up in the food chain if you were directly with the carrier, had a contract in place. But I feel like, especially these last couple of years, what's been kind of exposed by this that I wouldn't say is even like a positive and negative, but just something to keep in mind is, the carriers with the scale that they operate at, they don't have the capacity to give kind of the individual service that a service provider does by its nature. So if you are operating a supply chain that really, doesn't require any kind of oversight, you've got a lot of in-house resources to do things like tracking, to follow up on shipments, to keep track of documents. If you've got the sufficient in-house resources, I think that working directly with a carrier can still be a good option. But more and more what we're seeing is companies that are taxed with, a much more complicated cycle of booking their shipments, keeping track of their shipments, reacting to changes in the market, changes in consumer behavior, demand, and, carriers by their nature, again, they're very large companies. They're handling massive amounts of cargo. They don't have that ability to really customize what they're doing on a client by client basis. You're a lot of times, kind of pushed towards working with, kind of very like, I guess, broad generic type systems and tools that are not really geared towards any particular industry or any particular need. So, that's where I feel like the difference comes in when you work with service providers. They tend to have that ability to really kind of individualize what they're doing for different accounts where, at the carrier level, it's become probably even more difficult. And this is in an environment where carriers are starting to absorb up service providers as well and try to present themselves as more of an end-to-end solution. But I think that, by their nature, that individualization of services is just really I don't want to say completely impossible, but it's a very difficult nut to crack when you're operating at that scale.
Understood. Joe, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I was going to butt in and say I agree with that 100%. What you're saying there, Jason, you hit it spot on. As I said before, every company is different. If you're working for primarily for an importer, an exporter, ocean, air freight, maintaining contracts directly with steamship lines, which I've done before, does take a little bit more control, internal control. And if you do have that staff that is dedicated, I mean, that comes at a cost to have the staff, to have the space, to have enough work to keep all those people busy all the time. And if you also have the volumes to warrant it. Jason said before, yet that it is true that the steamship lines are reducing the number of TEU contract requirements that they're putting out there. It used to be if you didn't have less than 1,000 Ts or even 2,000 Ts, they weren't interested in you. Well, a few years ago, they started shifting that down to 200 Ts if you have enough, and then you can sign contracts directly with the steamship lines. But that's only one piece now. Okay, now I've got the ocean freight end. Now I have to go out and find a customs broker that's going to do the customs brokerage for me, and I have to make sure one person is always talking to the next one, and then I have a local delivery company, and you build the supply chain piece by piece. It is doable. Once again, if you have the staff and if you have the volume to warrant competitive rates. If you don't, then you put everything under one roof. You partner with somebody. You don't just partner with the first freight forwarding salesman that knocks on your door. You interview a few, you try out the service of a few, and then you partner with somebody that you trust, that you can get good customer service with a dedicated account representative. There's only one person you always have to send an email to, and they become an extension to your company. And it usually works out well. Everything's all under one roof now. The movement of the freight, the payment of the customs duties, the local delivery. And also in that case, they can't go like this, that, something else, well, Bob didn't make the freight available at the port, and that's why I'm going to send you this truck ordered not used bill for $300, whatever the case is. Everything's all under one roof. And then there's also other synergies from stuff like that. One of my favorite sayings is to maximize your freight dollar. Get as much out of that dollar that you've paid for freight as you possibly can. Most good freight forwarders have a lot of value adds that they can put on the table if you just ask. One of which is a PO management system, PO management platform. And if the forwarder that you've partnered with does have a good, robust PO management system, well, then that's all the information that they're doing themselves is going right into their system, and the information from that system is spilling out onto a usable platform that not only you could use, but you could make user IDs for your purchasing associates, for your receiving associates, for anyone else in your company, that they can tap right in there and see what's going on. So partnering is key, and wisely getting all your services under one roof does have its advantages.
Understood. So, Joe, I know one of the things that you're considering, because we talked about this in the past, um, is that in order for you to help reduce cost and risk in your supply chain, that you're looking at two things currently. One is a drawback program, because you have a certain amount of imports and exports, and also potentially turning your distribution facility into a foreign trade zone. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of us were taken back several years now. This is pre-COVID, when the Section 301 tariffs were introduced. All of a sudden, we came in with there was maybe a short, brief period of a ramp-up period. There was a list one of where only raw materials, and then a second list, and then finally the third and the fourth list came out, and we all were impacted. Importers, at least, were impacted with we'll say 25 additional percent duty on goods manufactured in China. Well, that was a wake-up call to everybody. Now, I think most logistics managers, professionals, supply chain managers, we'd all heard of ways to mitigate the impact of duty. Main ways being either a bonded warehouse or duty drawback programs or foreign trade zones. Well, that suddenly got thrust to the forefront now. When you were, if you were an importer of Chinese goods, got thrust right to the forefront. So what do we all do? What is the best way to go? Do we do a duty drawback program? We pay the duty all up front, and then when we ship things out, we have to go through a process of getting the money refunded back. Could take sometimes 9-10 months to get that money back, but at least it's coming back. There's paperwork involved. There's strict record keeping requirements needed for that. But the advantage for the duty drawback is that you could go back 5 years, right? So even if you're just listening to this now, if you're an importer right now, and if you're just listening to this now and say, oh, I should have thought of this 3 years ago when Section 301, or however many years, 4 years ago when Section 301 came out, well, you're in luck. You could still do that. It's not brain surgery. It does take a good, robust record-keeping platform. Hopefully, if you're an importer, you do take that as seriously as you should, your record-keeping requirements. So a duty drawback program could be good for you. The
Joe,
next step, of course.
Let me emphasize, if I can, that for the circumstances are, those are goods that get exported that were imported and duty were paid, right? I just want to make sure that that's what we're referring to is goods that were imported that now are getting exported from the United States.
That's correct, right. Everything is based on that. Customs will collect duty when you show them proof of export. They didn't stay in the commerce of the United States, and then you could reapply. You could apply for 99% of the duty that you paid upon import.
Right.
So that is more of a we'll call reflex strategy, is to get it back after the fact. Way to never pay it in the first place would be the foreign trade zone option, which again might sound a little daunting. You're actually cordoning off, if not physically, then with paint on the floor and maybe even sometimes less. You're making an area, you're declaring an area in your own warehouse that is not part of the commerce of the United States. In other words, imported goods have come in to your warehouse. They're stored in your warehouse, but they have not entered the commerce of the United States yet. You've not paid duty. You've filed the paperwork. Government knows it's here, but you've not paid duty on the goods. Now, 3 weeks from now, when you now want to ship some goods, if you ship them internationally, you export them, and you once again file the paperwork, and you've not paid any duty on the goods. They've never technically entered the commerce of the United States. 3 days from now, when you have another big order that you're moving to New Jersey or anywhere domestically, and the goods are ready for domestic outbound, the outbound truck, that's when you're technically making customs entry. and you do all of that, the customs allows you to wait an entire week or to do a consolidated entry, we'll say at the end of a week, for all the domestic shipments that you did. Without getting into too much detail, there's a lot of savings in that as well. Instead of doing customs entry after customs entry after customs entry and paying all the different fees that go along with that, you're now paying only one customs entry at the end of a week for everything that left your warehouse for a domestic destination. Fees I have seen, it depends how much you import, of course, how much you ship, but I have seen fees savings like the merchandise processing fee. I've seen studies where the fee savings alone could be close to $500,000. So it's not only the savings of the layout of the duty, you never laid out the duty in the first place, so you don't have to refund it like the drawback program, but you've never laid out the money in the first place, and you're saving quite a bit on your administrative and customs fees.
Great. Thank you,
Guys,
Joe.
as it turns out, we have to start taking a question. And at this point, we have a question that seems to be a little bit complex and might take a little bit of time. So I'd like to go ahead and start now, if that's okay.
Go right ahead, Rudy.
Yes, sir. So the question is, how are suppliers that you're working with handling the increasing compliance fines and fees from retailers? For an example, Walmart, OTIF, and SQEP programs, collect pickup programs, Kroger's ORAD programs, etc.
Joe, are you seeing any of that in your circumstance?
Well, I'm actually trying to look at the question myself so I could get the gist of it, because I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the gist of the question.
So let me, it was a little bit complex, so let me repeat it again, Joe. It says, how are suppliers that you're working with handling the increasing fines and fees from retailers? And that's the gist of the question. And then he just went on to give a couple of examples of retailers like Walmart, Kroger, something called collect pickup program. Those were just the examples of the retailers, but the question is about compliance fines and fees from retailers.
Okay, all right. So I guess that's a little shift then. I guess in the vein of international transportation, a supplier is more for import transportation, but if we're shipping out to customers, how are they handling the governance of regulatory compliance, things like that, management of their regulatory compliance? Is that the gist of the?
I think so. I think so. And so, if you have any ideas on it.
I guess I could speak on that. I mean, every importer, whether it be one of your suppliers that might be importing the goods, or if it's one of your customers, that is importing the goods in a foreign country, everybody involved in international trade should have a robust customs regulatory program and somebody, responsible at the table that fully understands their local customs regulatory compliance and ensures that they're obeying the laws. As far as late shipments and chargebacks, when you mentioned Walmart and things like that, that's what I imagine. Chargebacks and for delayed transportation services, things like that. Once again, it's partnering with the right transportation companies, both domestic and international, where there are commitments made. There is more control over the movement of your goods with high-end carriers. And if that represents an increased cost, having those increased costs reflected in your profit margins.
Right.
So another answer to the thing is we've helped a few companies over the last few years, and basically they have to change their margin around to be able to absorb some of this additional cost that they're going to incur when they deliver something and they don't meet the requirements under the contract, and there's a penalty that's involved. So basically, when they come to figuring out what their margin's going to be, they have to contemplate that a certain percentage of that margin is going to have to be used to absorb some of the penalties that might be involved. Other companies have created dedicated people assigned to that activity to manage it carefully, because it could be extremely expensive for some companies to make sure that they're valid and legitimate. But it is a point of contention between, suppliers and the big box retailers. That's an ongoing issue, and I don't think that there's one set or pat answer there. I think it's got to be looked at on a case by case basis of how it gets handled. Jason, did you add anything?
No, I agree. I mean, that's what I was thinking of too, in terms of the, retailer side penalties. A lot of these disruptions, I mean, we've been living with them for a while now. So my expectation would be that, suppliers are getting better at kind of accounting for it on their side financially, and then, retailers' expectations are kind of being, adjusted based on the realities of the industry. It would be my hope. But again, I agree with you, Tom. I think it has to be looked at case by case.
Right.
Okay, guys, well, we're going to need to wrap it up. And as it turns out, Heidi is going to put up a slide to provide some additional information of upcoming webinars. But I did want to thank Tom, Jason, and Joe for making themselves available. Obviously, fantastic information that is pertinent to what's going on right now, which allows us to be able to make some informed decisions about what's the next step to take and how to handle it. Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for making yourself available and providing us with all this intel. And we have provided here the email contact information for Tom, Jason, and Joe. You might take a picture of it with your camera, with your phone or whatever. And once again, if you have any questions from the District Export Council, feel free to get a hold of either me or Heidi Whitman, who is our administrative coordinator. And if you need anything else to answer any other questions that perhaps weren't answered or dealt with in this particular webinar, please feel free to contact us, and we will hook you up with whoever we think is the best resource to provide you the intelligence and information needed. Ms. Heidi, if you would go ahead and put up your slide, we'd really appreciate that. Okay, so here are some of the upcoming webinars that we're going to be having. I want to kind of give you a heads up so you can be prepared for them and register for these webinars. The Export-Import Bank and SBA programs on the 19th, dealing with also international banking, currency payment risk, and export credit insurance. This is part of our finance series, and we are having once again four parts, and we're going to provide one webinar per week to cover the entire finance series. So be looking out for that to be coming up soon, and make sure that you register so that you can attend it. Also want to make sure that you fill out the evaluation form, which will pop up at the end of the webinar. That's the way that we know whether we're doing a good job, whether we provide the kind of information that you're looking for, and provide us with any other information you think is necessary to provide great information that will allow you to enhance your export experience and make sure that you have as few problems as possible. We're here to try to help you as much as we can. That's our mission. But part of that is listening to you guys and finding out what else we can do for you. And I guess with that, Jonathan, do you have any last comments?
No, I don't. Again, thank you to the Arkansas Economic Development Commission and Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you to all the attendees out there, and of course, this couldn't be possible without our panelists. And the last thing I'd like to do is to Miss Heidi. She runs a tight ship, and she does such a great job getting everything organized and and going off without a hitch. So Ms. Heidi, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
with that,
Pleasure. My
I'm
pleasure.
done.
All right, and Ms. Heidi, if you'll go ahead and put up the survey, that would be swell. And we'd really appreciate if you would take the time to go ahead and provide to us the responses to the survey.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, and have a good rest of the afternoon.
Right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.